Why wasn't Christopher Columbus able to discover Spain? How many churches are there in heaven? How did the abandoned bicycle win its freedom? And how do we know which is God among the gods of Calcutta? Where's the child I was, still inside me? Do we learn kindness or the mask of kindness? Am I sometimes evil or am I always good? And why did I decide to migrate if my bones live in Chile? Hello and welcome to Bacan, an English language podcast about my Spanish language adventure in Chile. What you just heard was a collection of some of my favorite lines in Neruda's Book of Questions, translated by William O'Daly and published after Pablo's death. The 316 unanswerable questions in the book unveil a side of Neruda that I truly appreciate. The man who lived and loved in uncertainty really critiqued the world at large when necessary. Some of the questions seem to wink at you like, oh, haha, good luck trying to figure that one out, while some of the others bring you into his worldview, sadly but comfortably observing the zany and inexplicable nature of our lives. In this episode, I'm taking you north, to Antofagasta, to the Atacama Desert, to Vicuña and La Serena. In comparison to the south, which Neruda called Chile's wild, wild west, the north carries some dry, relaxed warmth. The biggest difference between the two, other than the dramatic climate shift, can be explained by the concentrations of Chilean indigenous groups there. While the south is home to the Mapuche, who are literally some of the only brave and capable souls committed to living on that nearly uninhabitable and isolated land, the north shares its border with both Peru and Bolivia. For this reason, the Mapuche share their land more often with the Aymara people up there. The oppression of Mapuches all over Chile has been a popular topic in this country's poetry. If I've learned anything here, it is that the struggle persists in modern life just as it did during colonial times. Pablo Neruda, who early in his career wrote several poems honoring and detailing the Mapuche way of life, describes the indigenous of the country as indigent monarchs with no shoes. Here's the rest of that poem, Sonnet 72, read by my beloved pal, Sophia Deck.
Amor mío, el invierno regresa a sus cuarteles, establece la tierra sus dones amarillos y pasamos la mano sobre un país remoto, sobre la cabellera de la... Winter returns to its billet, the earth fixes its yellow gifts, and we caress a distant land, stroking the hair of the globe. To leave, now, go! Wheels, ships, bells, airplanes wetted by infinite daylight, toward the archipelago's nuptial odor, longitudinal grains of joy. Let's go, get up, pin back your hair, take off and land, run and sing with the air and me. Let's take a train to Arabia or Tocopilla, only sailing like a distant pollen to piercing lands of rags and gardenias, ruled by indigent monarchs with no shoes. De harapos y gardenias gobernados por pobres monarcas sin zapatos.
Go. Wait, actually, hold on.
Please put that in the podcast. Please, 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 please.
You may speak now.
All right.
Talk to me about what stood out to you and why.
I just think Neruda has an amazing control of his words and exactly what he means, using nature as metaphor, that it's hard to even unpack the meaning in every line. And then this last line, ruled by indigent monarchs with no shoes, is just reminds me of when I was a little kid and I would run around on my grandparents' farms, and we thought that we were kings because we had this whole command of this farm, but we didn't. We just played all day and we had a good time, but that just, to me, it's the people who are poorer and who've got a command of the land around them that's so much more powerful than any governmental power can give you.
That's awesome.
It's really fucking beautiful.
No, yeah, it is. That's what makes him so accessible, is he is a very childlike writer.
He's childlike, but that just control of his language, and then also like these direct statements to, I guess it's his wife that he's writing to on these.
Yeah.
Like, pin back your hair, let's go, come on. Like, he's just excited about living life.
Right. And at this point, he was, I mean, this book came out, and he must have been in his 50s or something.
Yeah.
So he has incredible vigor, for sure.
Oh, yeah. He knows what's going on in the world, and he's not afraid to show other people what he sees. So many people are so silent about their inner world, and he's not.
He makes the simple stuff really political. Even love poetry becomes political.
Yeah. And the line, stroking the hair of the globe, I'm super into that.
That's crazy. What does that even mean?
I have no clue, but I can't wait to find out.
Yeah, I'll get back to you.
Find out what the hair of the globe is.
The one thing that the Mapuche people are best at is surviving. Making it to the next generation, and the generation after that, for now hundreds, possibly thousands of years. While the Incas were losing their empire to Conquistador Francisco Pizarro in 1532, the Mapuche were kicking Spanish ass in the Arauca War, holding out their territory through the conflict, only to be incorporated into the new Chilean country in the late 17th century. Though they've suffered major persecution and land loss, the Mapuche are strong, present, and unforgettable. And it is something that Chilean historians have had a seemingly hard time understanding, that indigenous identity is not a relic of the past, but a passionate and daily practice. This is the sound of the trompe, a traditional Mapuche instrument used to accompany poetry and play in the background of songs in Mapudungun. I first heard it on a field trip for one of my courses, where we visited an intercultural kindergarten in Santiago. As much as we might pretend, the study abroad experience is by no means a holistic encounter with another culture. Our programs protect us, corral us into high or middle-class host homes, and fill our days with coursework so that we fill our nights with familiar, safe clubs or pubs. Never has this sort of insulation been so apparent than when we waltzed into this adorable building teeming with small, Spanish-speaking babies. I hadn't realized so much time had passed since I had been around children, and it felt effing delightful. Even more delightful than basking in the pure joy of childhood was the fact that this particular kinder combined their usual school curriculum with lessons on the language and culture of the Mapuche. A couple times a month, a pair of leaders from a nearby Mapuche community, usually one male and one female, visit and teach the children music or integrate words and phrases from the indigenous language into their Spanish program. On the day we visited, we participated in a fertility ceremony called the Guillatun and planted a new garden alongside the children's play area. Once our work was done, we feasted on soup, sopaipillas, mate, and of course, empanadas baked with just one olive inside for good luck. The Mapuche in charge that day, the woman who took us all under her wing, is named Maria Inez Wenwunwir Andiwala, and she's a soft, tender, immeasurably powerful boss lady. She has given her entire life to the protection and promotion of her culture. Arguably the most famous Mapuche poetess of all time, Maria spends much of her time in schools like these, in cities like bustling Santiago, away from the natural splendor of her hometown Panguipulli, for this purpose. Homegirl freaking wrote the Spanish to Mapu dictionary. Just listen to her speak. In this interview, she was asked, "What message do you send through your poetry?" Here she replies that she wants to send the message that we have the power to create and build up our collective conscience. Our natural resources and our families have suffered abuse, she says, but we can protect and save what remains. During one of our breaks, we nibbled at piñones, the seeds of the national tree of Chile. Their taste is difficult to explain, but imagine a large, wet pine nut or almond wrapped in a leathery shell. The tree they belong to is ritually sacred to certain Mapuche communities, part of a long tradition surrounding nature. Maria told me after I scarfed down 5 or 6 piñones, When you eat the plant of the tree, you're eating the whole tree. Of course, Pablo Neruda wrote an ode to the piñone, but I'd rather finish this segment with one of Maria's poems, Mujer Mapuche, Mapuche Woman, translated to English by Ana Louise Dagnol. The sad sigh of a woman. She is a Mapuche woman. She can see both the light of day, the dark of night. The darkness blends with the dark color of her clothes. Although she is sad, she proudly wears her beautiful silver jewelry. Laces of all colors in her braids. She wears a red belt as well. She wants no more insults. She works so hard. Troubled by her dark skin, no one understands her. But she wants to defend her culture, carry on with her traditional customs. Mapuche woman, be like the condor. Despite his dark feathers, he feels happiness and great honor. He shines proudly on the coat of arms. You have a sincere and tender heart that overflows with pure blood. Woman of eternal tenderness, protect your children with great care. Beloved mother, don't be hard on yourself. Live peacefully with serenity, there near the natural world. I will give you a kopiwe flower to thank you for your kindness. A little school in Santiago is nowhere near as north as it gets in Chile, and indigenous rights are in conflict whether you're in the 1st or the 9th region. As we make our way up to the Atacama Desert, which, by the way, takes 24 hours on a bus, I will entertain you with a few hilarious and/or disturbing Chilean news stories that don't quite make international broadcasts, but are more than worthy of a listen. First up, the notorious Confort toilet paper settlement scandal, or what is now referred to as la colusión de las papeleras.
Confort de alta absorción, más rendidor que nunca. Por su textura especial, Confort alta absorción alcanza para...
Back in 2000, the owners of 2 major toilet tissue companies, PISA and CMPC, met at a golf course in central Chile and entered into a decade-long price-controlling scheme. The brand Confort has become somewhat of a catch-all phrase for toilet paper companies around the country. The operation, known clandestinely as Modelo, fixed market participation between the two companies at a ratio of 3-1, which translated into consumer premiums of up to 30% on all Chilean toilet paper, and price-fixing efforts such as these are nothing new. Medicine companies, chicken product producers, and more are all known industries in which it is common knowledge that, well, you're getting ripped off. But for the first time, someone is going to be held accountable. After 10 long years of secret meetings, burner phone contacts, and a net profit for business owners of almost $1 billion USD, the efforts of the Chilean National Economic Office led to a landmark settlement for consumers. In 2016, CMPC and PISA agreed to make just reparations for every Chilean over the age of 18 in the form of a one-time payment of 7,000 Chilean pesos per person, about 11 USD. It's becoming somewhat of a joke around Chilean dinner tables. What are you going to do with your 7 mil? They ask each other, laughing. For reference, 7 mil in Chile could buy you 2 bus tickets to Santiago from Valparaiso, or 6 bottles of Coca-Cola, or 2 tubs of ice cream, or a fancy bottle of Espumante, or 18 rolls of Comfort toilet paper. My Chilean parents joke that right when Banco Estado starts handing out the payments in August, they're going to pool their money to have a barbecue in the backyard to celebrate.
Confort alta absorción alcanza para la familia más numerosa.
Sorry to tell you this, but you bought the cheapest ticket you could find to get to the north of Chile, and it's taking a lot of stops along the way. You're going to have to sit through a little bit more news before we make it up there. So, another fun fact, toilet paper, being made out of paper, does actually grow on trees, and this is just fine, except that natural resources, like trees, are by and large concentrated in the Biobío region of central Chile. And guess who else lives in the Biobío? The Mapuche. Neoliberal economic policies that have been around since the dictatorship have had a devastating impact on indigenous communities and the nature that surrounds them. The most obvious example of this injustice came in the form of hydroelectric energy plants conceived in the early 1990s by a Spanish energy company called Endesa. Endesa targeted the fertile land and the powerful Biobío River in central Chile as the ideal location for 6 dams that, when erected, would force the relocation of 7 Mapuche communities, made up of about 500 individuals. The major dam, called Project Rauco, would also flood at least 14 cemeteries and 70 archaeological sites, as well as break at least 10 of the provisions outlined in the Chilean Environmental Law of 1994 and the Chilean Indigenous Law of 1993. The government and agencies tasked with upholding these laws were willing to look past the effects on indigenous communities in order to put economic growth first, which they argued would alleviate poverty and create sustainability. After all, even if families were being forced to move to new land, far away from home, in uncomfortable and alien climates, at the same time, energy prices for the rest of Chile were way down, and jobs in construction of the dam were helping to quell the short-term effects of unemployment in the area. In 1999, construction began on the Rauco Dam, and in 2003, the final remaining protesters accepted their relocation and ceased all legal demands against Endesa. It's up to you how you want to view this issue, but for me it seems pretty clear-cut. Development in Chile means big-budget industrial projects led by high-profile economic conglomerates. Anyone who stands in the way, anyone who stands up for the land that they stand to lose, will be literally drowned out in the pursuit of national economic security. Another hot topic issue in Chile right now is sexual abuse, and the 2 major battlefields on which this fight is being staged are 1, the Catholic Church, and 2, the Chilean university system. So when I was first planning on coming to Chile, I watched the news and interwebs rapidly for any information, any English sources reporting on the country's state of affairs. The information was few and far between, except for one story that caught my eye back in January. Pope Francis was to make a big papal visit to Santiago, the capital, and a week before his trip, an as-of-yet unidentified group set off bombs at 3 different churches. The people were pissed. Some want to pin the attack on the Mapuche, but I'm more apt to believe the violence is coming from a place of deep resentment and disappointment following the case of Caradima in 2011. Father Caradima of the El Bosque parish in Santiago was found guilty by the Vatican for the sexual abuse of countless young persons during his lifelong career in the clergy. Though this sentence had indelible consequences, Caradima was stripped of his priesthood. The case revealed a deep level of complicity that was spread throughout the entire extent of the Chilean religious hierarchy. As a priest, Caradima not only wielded great influence as a mentor to minors and aspiring spirituals, but was also widely considered a community leader. Pope Francis was widely criticized for not taking the allegations seriously for a number of years, and as of now, no legal criminal charges have been brought against Caradima due to the statute of limitations. Just this May, all 34 Chilean bishops, all of them, every single one, who went to visit the Pope, submitted their resignation on the same day in Vatican City. In their joint statement, they said, quote, "We want to restore justice." Pope Francis took responsibility, telling one of the victims who first went public, quote, "I was part of the problem." Now, with the Chilean church beginning its complete reconstruction, the next step is to rebuild a university culture that's currently cozied up with similar issues of sexual abuse and corruption of power. The Chilean university where I study, colloquially referred to, at least by us gringos, as La Católica, is kind of empty these days. It used to take me about 15 minutes of waiting to get a microwave during lunch, but over the past month I've been able to heat my lunch in under 5. Tables were scarce before, but now my friends and I have the whole quad to ourselves. The cafe line is no longer stretched out the door. The halls no longer bustle with activity. But it's finals time. So what gives? Where the frick is everyone? Where are all the Chilean friends my program promised me I would make? Turns out that Chile is a lot more involved than the US when it comes to student protest. So much so that when student leaders decided that enough was enough in regards to predatory machismo in student-professor relationships, they all got together and voted to suspend classes. This is what's called a paro, and it explains why the international students are by and large the only ones hanging out in Casa Central. Paros are expensive for basically everyone and can turn fairly violent, but they're more common than you might expect. During one of my courses, our Chilean professor told the class that the basement room we were studying in was a popular place for students to sleep during overnight protests, thanks to the lack of windows and comfy carpet. We are right in the center of what BBC World is calling a wave of feminist protests across Santiago and Valparaiso. Student leaders are demanding, among other things, a complete rehaul of sexual abuse policies from their university directors and stricter laws from Congress to enforce them. Another interesting demand coming from a university in Santiago is a call to change the plural we form nosotros to nosotres with an E when indicating groups of mixed gender. This would truly counter the patriarchal default inherent in the Spanish language. Instead of learning in class, students have put their degree plans on hold and traded their textbooks in for handmade protest signs and pickets. Weekly marches are announced online. There is no end in sight. Finally, we've made it to the Atacama Desert of the North, the driest place in the world, another planet. Once you pass all the requisite tourist hurdles and push farther into the park, all semblance of the modern world just disappears. You're on the moon, watching the sun orbit. You're in a boiling hot thermal bath hidden in a deep valley. You're plodding along through the salt flats, watching llamas grazing, shivering in the dawn. It's an experience that can't quite be explained over audio, but you've probably seen it before and not even known what you were looking at. Ever watch Spy Kids, James Bond, Crystal Fairy and the Magical Cactus? Guys, this place is literal Mars, literal moon, and it's been in a billion of movies. But it's not perfect. Its beauty is being slowly chipped away by rampant lithium mining and general global warming phenomena. The rich resources underneath the park's surface have been contested land for a long, long time, and it may be within our lifetime that we start to lose access to this beautiful natural space. Just as the Mapuche are locked in battle with hydroelectric superpower conglomerates in the south, in the north, it's the Aymara people versus the geothermal businesses, and it's going to be a close one. Not to mention that even I'm a little wary of the effects of tourism on the area. Obviously, having adventurers and families come to the Atacama Desert is an important part of proving to the government that it's worth preserving as something to look at rather than tear apart for its energy. But still, with touring comes responsibility, respect. All you have to do is look at certain policies around the world that regulate the tourism industry to know that it's an issue worth caring about, worth losing money over. For example, the 200 daily guest cap in Machu Picchu, or maybe something more informal, like the 2017 air pollution red alert in China. I wrote the following essay while sitting in a cafe on my last day in San Pedro, the little town that acts as the jumping off point for anyone wanting to get into the desert by day. Over and over again, while traveling to the more touristy parts of Chile, I had the feeling of being in Epcot, play-acting South America with all the expected pleasures safely presented to me. Cheap and overflowing glasses of beer, dirty but not dangerous street dogs, Nescafe machines, apples for 300 pesos, everything covered in a layer of pretty, glittering dust. No air conditioning, no heating, open skies, littered with stars. And San Pedro de Atacama was one such city. I loved it and was suspicious of why. It looked as if it were built in one day. Clay risen from the ground in cavernous chunks by cozy neighbors. There was no discernible empty space between any shops so that the sun had to lift up over the walls to warm you. Even in winter, when I arrived, the hostels were full, stuffed with youthful, boisterous Europeans speaking in the lingua franca, broken English. It was almost too easy to make friends, too easy to woo the grocery boys, too easy to understand the waiters. Even now, as I write this from Roots, which is surprisingly not the first Bob Marley-themed restaurant I visited in this country, I share the space with one handsome barista and one other gringa, a blonde I'm almost immediately suspicious of. She proves me right when she strolls up to the counter and has the gall to ask, in Valley Girl tinted English, "Can I get a cappuccino, and is that the Wi-Fi password?" The handsome barista blinks, not understanding her. There's a moment of pregnant silence, during which I pray that she will not do what she ends up doing, repeating herself at a higher volume. I am disturbed at her lack of patience. Would it really have been that difficult to Google Translate the conjugation? But anyways, he's good-natured about it, recognizes keywords like cappuccino and Wi-Fi, and waves her away. I hope he spits in her cappuccino, I think, in a flash of unkindness. But then I hear my own accent as I ask for butter. I see her write in a little journal just like me, and Ella Fitzgerald comes on, and I soften. In the world in which we live now, we need each other. A man in a chunky yellow sweater yells out in some Argentinian way through the window. The female cook laughs. I hear a few dogs bark in the distance, and a big truck barrels down the road, holding fluffy heads of lettuce. Before long, the other gringa is served her coffee, and she whispers, "Gracias." That wraps up episode 5. We've come a long way together, you and I. I went north and am going north still. My next episode will be my last, and it'll be released after I return back to the States. Stick around for a second, and to end, we'll hear my friend and roommate Emily read Sonnet 87 about Antofagasta, the northernmost region we've been chatting about. Thanks for listening this time, y'all.
Three birds of the sea, 3 sunbeams, 3 scissors, crossed this cold sky towards Antofagasta. That's why the air was left trembling, why everything trembled like a wounded flag. Loneliness, give me the sign of your ceaseless origins, the path, hardly a path, of the cruel birds, the palpitation that surely comes before honey, music, the sea, a birth. Loneliness sustained by a constant face, like a calm, slow flower constantly held out till it reaches the pure, swarming throngs of the sky. Cold wings of the sea, of the archipelago, went flying towards the sands of northeast Chile. The night slid shut its heavenly bolt.